Yeah, it was many years ago, in fact going back to 2007 when Mike Kavanagh, that's one of the shows we did, in fact he even could have been carping on, gave me some details about the multi-rig. Until then I'd used the braided version of the multi-rig, which was a standard pop-up rig, and to change things round I looked at what Mike did and I really liked the look of the multi-rig. Now most people use a multi-rig because it allows them to change the hook and things like that. I've never ever used a multi-rig purely and simply because it allows me to use a different hook, and so I can use the same hook length, because I'm one of those people who always uses a new hook length and bait after each take or each fish hopefully. I've never used it for what most people do, so when people say to me, but you know, what is the point of using it in a different version? I use it purely and simply because of the effectiveness of the way that the hook length kicks the hook bait out, and the fact that it sits it properly, and it just works for me. It's not about saving the hook length and using a new hook each time, it's about the way it sits for me. It took me about 4-5 years to get the multi-rig as most people know it correctly, which is without the tubing, and that worked absolutely brilliant. I started off originally back in the bad old days, or the good old days, with the Gardner Mugger hooks, which are absolutely brilliant. I then moved on to Nash's Fang X hooks, which were a little bit thicker in the wire and didn't have so much of a turned in eye, and that worked brilliantly. I caught hundreds, maybe even thousands of carp. I don't really know, I don't count them all, but certainly hundreds of carp on the bog standard multi-rig. That worked great when I was using 15mm baits with a 5 or 6 hook, but in winter or on certain venues I like to use a slightly smaller hook bait, a sort of 10, 11, 12 or at the maximum 13mm. And I noticed that when I put the little bait on with the normal curved shank hook that you would use with a multi-rig, it didn't really sit properly, and I wasn't happy how it sat. So what I did, I started messing around with various things, and I added a bit of tubing to give it a kicker. Now originally I used the soft silicone tubing to give it the kicker, but unfortunately the tubing doesn't work when it's soft quite as well. So I started using the shrink tubing, and instead of using the curved shank hook, because when you put tubing with a curved shank hook, you swallow up, for want of a better word, a lot of the gape. So instead I started using the square bend hook, which is the Nash Fang Twister, and I put the kicker on there. Now that's Nash Diffusion 1mm shrink tube. I use that with 4s, 5s and 6s, and to be honest I don't often use a hook smaller than a 6. A 5 is the usual hook. Sometimes I'll use a 4. The new Nash pinpoints are slightly smaller from my view. I've not actually technically measured them, and I use a size 4 now rather than a 5. And I find with a smaller hook bait, and this hook bait is probably 11mm, and I find it just sits perfectly, and with that kicker it just swivels beautifully. I'm not going to go on about the benefits of the multi-rig, but I have found that when you have the shrink tube kicker with that and a smaller hook bait, it spins better and it hooks better. So that's the advantages of the shrink tube, and it also stays. There are various types of shrink tube. I use the Nash Diffusion because it stays rigid until obviously you get a carp. People say to me, yeah, but that defeats the nature and the aspect of multi-rigging, that you can only use it once. I only ever use it once anyway. A hook, in my impression, is never as sharp twice. A hook length is never as strong twice. It's certainly never as straight twice. And for the cost of a hook, cost of a bit of a hook length, compared to what we spend on rods, reels, buzzers, bait, travelling there, it baffles me that people will say, oh yeah, but I saved a hook length, or I saved a hook and I resharpened it. It's false economy in my own impression. And don't think, well, he gets sponsored by Nash so he gets it for free. Yeah, of course I get it for free. But if you pick up any of my work from 1986, 1996, 2006, even when I paid for my own gear, I always used a brand new hook length, for every fish. Never use it twice. You'll never find me, unless maybe I fish somewhere like Drayton or Chestnut and I simply have run out of them. I'll never use a hook or hook link twice. I'll have 20, 30, 40 sometimes tied. Fish goes in the net, clip it off, put a new hook length on, bang it out, and then photograph the fish. So I'm not bothered by the fact that a shrink tube kicker means I can't use the hook twice. Some people use it with a soft kicker. I know that Nash make kickers, a lot of other people make kickers, so they can use it twice. But my purpose is I like that rigid shrink tube kicker, and this is what I use most of the time now. I use the one with the shrink tube. The only time I use the standard multi-rig, which is the curved shank hook without the stiff tubing, is when I'm using bigger baits, sort of like 15, 16, 17, 18 mil hook bait, and I find that it sits better then with a curved shank hook. The Fang X is thicker in the wire and a slightly stronger hook, so in very thick weed hook and hold I'll use the curved shank with without the kicker, and that works for me. But probably 80-90% of the time I'm using the multi-rig like that, and when it's very heavy weed I'll use the Fang X without it, and that is simply the kicker. The best way is to try it yourself. Certainly with a small hook bait it is an advantage. Wow. For many years I always used to tie my baits on, as you know a lot of people still do, the little split ring, the oval ring, whatever you want to call it, flossed it on, and that worked great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a bit fiddly, it required you to get the knot correctly, pull it in, super glue it, blob it, etc, etc. When I started using harder hook baits, I noticed there were some bog standard bait screws available. I can't remember who brought the first ones out. I'm not sure who it was. I've seen them by various companies, so I'm not going to say who I thought. So the bait screw when your hook baits are hard enough, a bait screw straight off the back of the multi-rig loop, straight into the back of it, works perfectly if you've got a hard hook bait. However, the problem is when you don't use a hard hook bait. Some hook baits, particularly fish meal based baits, are not so hard, and the trouble is if you screw the bait screw in, as the bait softens slightly, what happens is that the hook bait can actually come off. Now most of the baits I use are high vis, bright, high attract hook baits, so it's the white, it's the yellow, it's the pink. They're quite hard, often they're not soaked, strong flavours, visual plus strong flavours, rock hard, and I would say they catch me probably 90% of the fish I catch on the multi-rig. However, sometimes for whatever reason, can't explain why, the carp want you to match the hatch. So, you know, covering something slightly else is I start with a white, I'll try a pink, then I'll try a yellow, and if I've got fish over where I'm fishing and I'm convinced I should be getting a bite, the next thing I'll do is match the hatch. Now in short sessions, these are the key airball pop-ups. A short session, you know, somewhere between 2 and 8 hours, I'll quite happily screw them in and there isn't a problem. However, when I'm fishing longer, when I'm doing an overnighter and I'm wanting to match the hatch, in other words, have the same colour type of pop-up as the free offerings I'm using, if I'm not going to get a bite for maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, especially when it's warmer in the summer, you'd be surprised what warm weather does to your baits to soften them, then in effect I go back to matching the hatch and I floss them on. So again, instead of having a bait screw, I just have a bog standard 2mm ring and I floss the bait over. That's simply a grinner knot. I tie a grinner knot around the pop-up, I pull it tight, and you really have to get it right. If you pull it tight and you literally pull it with your teeth, it pulls it into it. I then just tie it direct to that. I add a little bit of super glue. I'm not worried about super glue at all, it doesn't worry me at all. I don't like to get it smeared over the bait, but once the super glue is on there, and I trim it as neat as I can, and carefully with a naked flame I blob it. Now that is never ever going to come off, because what happens is even if your bait slightly softens, it will soften and it will expand, and as it expands it bites into the dental floss, and the dental floss then is a binder, it cannot come off, and you can whack that as far as you want and it will never come off. Clearly, if you're dealing with poisson chat and you've got lots and lots of nuisance fish, it can be a problem, but I've never had one of these come off and it's not put me off at all. But as I say, 90% of the time I use a bog standard bait screw. Now the bait screws I use are the tiny little ones. Nash sell them, Avid sell them, loads of people sell them. I don't like the large plastic ones which are coloured to match your hook bait. I find that baffling. I can't understand why people do it. Firstly, they're so big that when you screw them into your hook bait, they make a massive hole in your hook bait. Secondly, they're colour coded. I can't see the point in a large colour coded bait screw when you can have a small one that screws straight in. So I don't use the large ones. I use the very small ones. I say Nash do them, King of the Pond do them. You get 25 of them for a couple of pound. Being a Yorkshireman, I'm still tight. When I finish the session, I chop the hook off, take the hook bait off, stick them in a little pot. When I go home, I simply clip off the bait screw, clean it, put it back in the box, and then use it again for my next thing. So bait screws, certainly for always when I'm using pop-ups, and certainly for hard hook baits, I use a bait screw. Wow, how many times do I use a bottom bait rig? Flipping heck, probably about as many times as I open my wallet, I would say. Not very often unless I have to do. Dare I say it, I mean, I really should look at my diaries. I would guess that if you took out the fish that are caught on floaters, the occasional fish I've caught on zigs, the ones that I've caught stalking, I would say that 95% of the fish I catch are on pop-ups. And when I say pop-ups, I mean anything where the hook is somewhere between 1-2 millimeters off the bottom up to maybe the maximum of 5 millimeters. So I would say, if I'm being honest, 95% of the fish I catch are on pop-ups. And that's not just easy waters, that's harder waters, it's long range, short range, winter, summer, it's weedy waters, it's clear waters, it's gravel pits. I catch most of my fish with pop-ups, and this goes back probably 30 years. The waters I fished 30 years ago up in the north were all very weedy. A lot of the southern waters were gravel pits, sand pits, and were clear, and you can bang the bottom baits out and not a problem, and pull them back and test, etc, etc. If you did that on the waters I fished in 1984, 85, 86, 87, 88, all you would have ended was a load of weed all over your hook point, and you wouldn't have caught a carp. So for the very early years of my carp fishing, I was always using pop-ups, and so I had to tweak my pop-ups and my pop-up setup to the maximum effectiveness. And it's really weird because I was this guy using pop-ups and most other people were talking about these weird bottom bait rigs, and I thought, you know, I'm the only guy using pop-ups, and I was sort of poo-pooed at times. Oh, you're using pop-ups, you know, bottom baits are where it is. The problem with a pop-up, the problem with a bottom bait rig is that with a bottom bait rig, it's not that the bait's on the bottom that worries me, because yeah, the free offerings are on the bottom or very near the bottom. The problem that worries me is the fact that the hook point is on the bottom. Now if the water is very, very clear and there are no obstructions on the bottom, I ain't got a problem with a hook point being on the bottom. But the majority of waters I have fished and still do fish have stuff on the bottom, and that could be little bits of weed, silkweed, a lot of weed, and the only thing that connects you to the carp, that is the most important thing in the world, is the hook and the hook point. If the carp can't get that hook into its mouth, and more importantly the hook point to bite, you ain't going to catch a carp. It's as simple as that. And what worries me is that that hook and hook point have something over it which stops the hook going in the carp's mouth. And I realised this when I used to watch people fishing with bottom baits for years. They used to cast out and often would get a run before me. They'd cast the bottom bait out and usually the run came probably within 5 or 10 minutes. They got that run and landed the fish. And what I did notice is if they didn't get a bite within 5 or 10 minutes, they often didn't get a bite at all, or if they did have a bite, the fish would fall off during the playing of the fish. And what I think is that they were getting fish that were finding the bait before the hook got obscured with the weed. because when carp come up to your bait, the amount of movement of the water is incredible. You know, they don't just materialise in your swim, they don't just appear over your hook bait, they move, especially in the summer months, and the movement from their fins and their body, it lifts the weed up and down. And the weed going up and down, even when you chuck a PVA bag out, that weed can cover your hook point. And even if the carp, and you are lucky enough to get the hook bait in the carp's mouth, if there's any weed over that hook point, then it's game over, because often you'll get a little bit of a movement, you'll strike, and that hook doesn't go in. And we use these very sharp hooks. Don't matter how sharp your hook is, if it's covered in weed, it's a waste of time. And I think what happens is sometimes they were getting pickups later in the day or at night, and there was weed over the hook, and they played the fish, but the hook point wasn't going in fully, and the fish would fall off. And that's the reason why I don't use bottom baits most of the time, because most of the waters I fish have weed, are covered in weed, and I have no confidence in it. However, there are occasions, as I covered in the when I talked about the bait floss and flossing baits on, I usually start with a pop-up, yellow, white, pink, those bright eye attractive ones. If I'm on fish and I'm not getting a bite, then I will match the hatch. In other words, I'll use the same colour pop-up as I'm using a street offerings, which is usually the key, so it's a dark brown, reddish colour. Occasionally, when they're really churning the bottom, even a pop-up matching the hatch off the bottom won't do it. For some reason, they won't pick that pop-up, even when the hook point is maybe only 5-10 millimetres off the bottom, in which case I'll use a bottom bait. I use one of the Nash cultured hook baits, so it's one of those which starts off that size and breaks down. I don't use, and this is a little bit different, when I use a bottom bait, I don't use wafters or things like that. I use a bog standard cultured hook bait, and I don't use a sharpened hook. I use a pinpoint hook, the Nash ones, straight as it comes out the packet. The fine hook points are absolutely brilliant, but the problem is when they're on the bottom they can turn over, and I don't like that. I've had hook points turn over when I've pulled into weed, so putting on the bottom, even if you don't pull back, I'm not happy with sharpened hook points on the bottom. So with bottom baits, I use them straight out the packet. Obviously look at them with my eyepiece just to make sure they're as sharp as possible, and it's a very bog standard rig like this. Nothing fancy about this. I think some people call it the claw rig, and all it is simply, I've got probably anywhere between 4 and 8 inches of coated braid. I've uncoated the last 6 inches. I've tied a separate hair, and as you can see the hair is continued. I've mounted the hook bait on it, and I've used a bit of silicone there. In effect, it makes the point heavy, so when the hook bait goes into the carp's mouth, the weight of it flips the hook over and it sits into the carp's mouth. Again, I've used the stiff diffusion shrink tube. It looks like a pop-up, but it isn't. But I use the shot. It just sort of tweaks the hook in, and that little bit of shot seems to flip the hook in at the bottom centre. And it's a bog standard bottom bait. I'll use that sometimes with a little mesh bag, or maybe a 2-bait stringer, or on its own if I'm fishing at short range. But only very rare occasions I have to be sure that if there's any bottom weed, the carp are ripping it to pieces and they're churning it, or it's a totally clear bottom. It's probably my 4th kind of bait that I would chuck out. White, pink, yellow, match the hatch, pop-ups, and then out goes a bottom bait. It's my last choice, but on very clear waters, it sometimes is my first choice. Even on a clean gravel pit, clean sand pit, I'll certainly put a pop-up out on one rod and a cultured hook bait on the other. It's not complicated, but it's my last choice for the reason I've given you. Yeah, I guess if I'm going to remember for one thing, it's if it ain't bust, don't fix it. I use what I use and it tends to work for me. There are all sorts of, people talk about carp rigs, they talk about carp rigs, and this gets confusing for people, because a carp rig is 2 things to me. It's an end tackle, which is what you see here, and it's a presentation, which is the hook and the hook length and the hook bait. So carp rigs split into 2. When we talk end tackles, I tend to use, again a bit like pop-up rigs, I tend to use the same end tackle for about 95% of my fishing. When I use a chod setup, very rarely, clearly I'm not going to use a lead clip, and when I'm fishing extremely long range, I might use a helicopter setup or into silt. But most of the time I'm fishing waters where I'm casting maybe 90 to 100 yards at the most, but on average 30, 40, 50 yards. They're a lot easier to catch the closer in. Don't make it hard on yourself and fish further out. They are where they are, and I'd find it easier to catch them at 30 yards than 50 yards. It's easier to bait up. So most of the time I'm using a bog standard lead clip setup, and it works for me and it works for most presentations I use. If leaders are allowed, I use the Nash diffusion leader. Absolutely brilliant. Most importantly for carp care, it's a soft leader. I'm not keen on naked setups just because you've got the line running against the flanks of the carp and it can lift scales up from what I've seen. When you use these diffusion leaders, these are softer and they're softer against the flanks of the carp. They come in two lengths, 0.75 of a metre and 1.5 metres. For 95% of the time I use 0.75. They come with a loop at each end. You can get them in various types. They come with lead clips set up. You get them set up as you want, or I just make them up as I can. The loop at the far end is where you tie your hook length. Some people do loop to loop. I simply tie a 4 or a 5 turn grinner. I pull it a double turn through. I pull it tight. I've never had one go, touch wood, on this ever. Never had one go at all. I had a very tiny bit of super glue to it, and then I'll use that. I've never ever, I think I've only had a leader go once on a snag, but I've never had a leader part when I've been playing a fish. They are absolutely rock solid, and I'll leave these on for as long as I want until I change my setups. And when you want to change them and change a different setup, all you need to do is cut the knot. You don't cut the loop, you cut the knot, and you can use it again, which is, you know, very good for us tight Yorkshiremen. It's a bog standard Nash safety bead, safety clip. It's the one with the pin. The reason that you're pinning it is that you are making sure that any pressure pushes the lead off. It's the Nash one, so I tend to find that components from one company fit together best. So if I was using Fox gear, I would probably use all Fox scenes because they're made to work together. So with the Nash, I've got the Nash diffusion leader. I've got their safety bead, which has got the pin to pin the swivel into the clip, because when the carp goes into weed or snags, all the pressure is on the lead. The lead is then popped off, and it's more likely that the carp won't be dragging the lead around. The problem with losing fish is when that is banging around, that will gather weed up, that will pick snags up, and once you get the ball of weed or snags around that, it ain't going to come off, and that's when you break, that's when you're losing fish. I don't want the lead coming off each and every time I hook a carp. Again, obviously I'm sponsored by Nash, but the last thing I want to be doing is depositing leads each and every time I get a take. Now what I do is I've got the soft Nash tail rubber. I wet this and I push the tail rubber on as tight as possible. Yep, as tight as possible. The reason why is because this tail rubber is really soft silicone. With it being soft silicone, any pressure forces it back and it just pops off like that. If it's hard rubber, it doesn't pop off and you have to click it on once, 2, 3 times as I've seen. But with soft silicone, it just rolls back and it's absolutely brilliant. So what it means is that if you're playing a carp, it's not going to drop the lead until it goes into weed. So it's the soft Nash silicone back tail rubbers with a standard lead. Now the lead size I use for most of fishing is 2 or 2.5 ounces. Some people use 3.5 ounces because they want that to set the lead. Now with me, as far as I'm concerned, when the carp takes the hook into its mouth and that hook touches its mouth, I don't want the lead to have to set the hook. I want the hook to prick itself into the carp's mouth. And when you're using sharpened hooks, particularly sharpened hooks, they will prick themselves without you having to feel the lead. And I've done this in tackle shops time and time again. I show people these presentations, I'll put the hook in my hand, turn it over, and simply the weight of the pop-up and the shot will put that hook into your hand or the carp's mouth. So I don't need 3 or 4 ounces of lead to set the hook. In the olden days, hooks weren't as sharp by a long way, and we found that the heavier the lead, the more likely you were to prick the carp. And nowadays you've got hooks that are 4, 5 and 6 that are as sharp as 8s, 10s, 12s in the olden days, and I think you got more runs in the olden days with smaller hooks simply because they were sharper, and larger legs simply because they were pulling the blunter hooks in. Nowadays you don't need to use large leads to pull hooks home, so I use literally 2 or 2.5 ounces. 2 ounces with fluorocarbon and standard rods, not flashy rods, the Nash £3 pursuits. I can hit 80 yards all day, every day. If there's a wind in my face or a chopper, I want to go up to 100 yards, I'll go up to 2.5 ounces. But I find that 2 ounces or 2.5 ounces of lead is enough for me to cast accurately and, more importantly, feel the bottom. Because the purpose of the end tackle is not only to get the presentation out there, but I need to feel what I'm landing on. And when you're using 3, 3.5, 4 ounces of lead, I don't find that I can feel the bottom at all. I find that with 2.5 ounces of lead, not only do I get the end tackle out there, but I can actually feel what it's dropping on. So I find that 2.5 ounces of lead is sufficient on a lead clip, and that catches me most of the carp I want to catch. And the last additional thing, and this isn't made by Nash, they used to make them but they don't make them anymore, is the big ring swivel. These are made, or these are distributed by Rig It Tackle, and I think that Atomic Tackle do as well. All it means is that when you cast out, it allows the hook length to rotate, and because when your lead hits the bottom, it allows the hook length to flop over. Your hook length sits a lot better when it flops over straight. If you tie it direct to the swivel, a standard little swivel, it will loop because of the tension. If you use that, it allows it to flop over and it never ever tangles. So that's the bog standard end tackle I use. Catches me most of the fish I need to catch, and I'm sure it will do for you. Right, foam. Now this is something that seems to confuse most people nowadays. The number of people who get this completely wrong is baffling, or maybe it isn't baffling. The first thing with foam, PVA foam, or foam nuggets as I call them, is that not all foam nuggets are the same. With foam nuggets, they need to be of a certain size. The bigger they are, the better, because you're using foam for buoyancy, and the bigger they are, the more buoyant they are. So don't be tempted to get these small thin ones, and don't be tempted to use foam that's been in packets that's got crushed, because when it gets crushed it gets condensed. When it gets condensed it loses its buoyancy. When it loses its buoyancy it ain't no good for anything. So that's the reason I always keep my foam not in the packets or plastic bags they come in, but in the large tubs that I've described before. That stops them getting crushed. So any kind of large bait tub, generally coloured ones so that the light doesn't penetrate, and they need to be kept dry, because when you get moisture in the foam it ceases to be foam, it goes all sticky and horrible, and it's of no use at all. And the reason I use foam is, number one, to stop it tangling, and number two, so that when the lead hits the bottom, the pop-up presentation is suspended above the lead. When the foam comes off, the lead will allow the hook length will then kick out, and this will settle properly. But you've got to do it properly. So many people do it wrong, and it honestly is dead simple. I use coloured foam purely and simply so that I can see when it's come off. If you use 2 bits of white foam or yellow foam or whatever, the same foam, you could never tell whether, certainly at anything over 40 yards, whether 1 piece has come off or whether 2 pieces has come off. So I use 2 different bits. Generally I use the lighter at the front, and all you do, it's very, very simple, is you just hook that over the front of the hook. Very simple, dead easy. And the sharper the hook is, the easier it will go through the foam. The second thing is that I simply lick the back of each corner of that foam, like that, and then I get another bit of foam, definitely a different colour, put it round the back and squeeze the edges, just round the back. In effect, you create what I call the polo or the donut effect. What that does is that when you cast out, that allows the water to go between the two. You are not waiting or wanting the foam to dissolve. I don't want it to dissolve, I'm not bothered about that. What I want is the water to go up the middle. When the water goes up the middle, what it does is it forces the two bits of foam apart. And you will always find that the back foam comes off first, so that's the purple foam. Once the back foam comes off, then the lighter foam on the front will lift off. It will come off like that, hit the top. You'll see two bits of foam have come off. You'll know that your hook length has kicked out perfectly, it's fishing perfectly, and it's spot on. And it is that simple. I always make sure that the foam comes off. In the winter it can take about 20 to 30 seconds to come off. In the summer it'll be off in 10 or 15 seconds, which gives me a chance to bait up. Use the right foam. I use the solar foam or the gardener foam. You can use white, but I also have a colour one behind it, and it honestly is a massive advantage. Practice it in the edge and get it right. It's a massive advantage. No, isn't it funny? It's looked down on by most people. Certainly some of our more high profile anglers, who indeed are sponsored themselves, which is a bit bizarre, tut young kids, or not even young kids, wanting to get sponsored, which is alright, but when you're sponsored yourself you really shouldn't be biting the hand that feeds you. One of the things I'm asked most often, other than how to tie a multi-rig, is about sponsorship, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We all go fishing for our own reasons, and if you can get sponsored or supported, as I would call it, then that helps your fishing. So if you want to be sponsored or supported, there's nothing wrong with that. First thing I need to say is that don't expect that carp fishing is Premier League football. There are very few people who make a living out of carp fishing. If you own a company, a large company, then you will make your living out of carp fishing. If you work for the company, in other words you work 9 to 5 hours, or probably more like 8 to 8 hours, then you will make your living out of carp fishing. But the majority of you won't be looking at that kind of employment. You'll be looking at sponsorship or assistance or support with bait or rigs or tackle and things like that, which is how I started. I started work in 1980 working for the courts. I didn't ever want to leave the courts, but I did want to have product assistance. I did like the idea of having my picture in the paper, somebody taking an interest in me and somebody supporting me, because if I've got the choice of paying £5 for hooks, or in those days paying £3 and not paying at all, then I prefer to not pay at all. And anybody who doesn't do that, then that's up to them. The thing with sponsorship is you can't expect to leap in at the deep end. You can't expect to go up to Kevin Nash or Lewis from Fox or Lewis from Gardner or Mainline or whatever and expect to get sponsored, because that ain't going to happen. The fishing business is a business. That's why it's called a business. And people will support, assist or sponsor you if you can aid their business. And you've got to look at it both short term and long term. And short term is that you need to enjoy what you're doing. You're not going to do this and make £1 million, or probably even £100,000 or £10,000. You should go fishing because you enjoy fishing. If you are only going fishing because it's a business, you will burn yourself out. Pick up any old carp world, any old advanced carp fishing, big carp anywhere. People blow themselves out when they simply don't enjoy fishing anymore. And the only reason that I'm still fishing or carp fishing 30 odd years on is because I enjoy what I'm doing. Whether I'm sponsored, assisted, supported or not, I'm going to go fishing. The fact that I am makes it a bit easier. So the first thing is, are you fishing for the right reasons? Do you enjoy it? And if you do enjoy it, that's great, because keep doing it, because there will be times when you ain't going to get product assistance and you're not flavour of the day. And are you still going to keep doing it? Well, even if I wasn't sponsored anymore or etc., I'd be still out there, still getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, still having one last cast, still enjoying it whether I'm sponsored or not. But sponsorship is a great idea. So how do you get sponsored? Well, it's a business, so you have got to make them want you. You can go to them without any CV, and it'll be, if you do get a response, it'll be a Dear John. So what you've got to do is you've got to do something that makes you attractive to the business that you're trying to join. Loyalty is a big thing. So if you've been using X and Y for years and all of a sudden go on to Z and say, can I use your products or can I have them a bit discount, they're not going to do it. So the first thing I would say to, or the second thing I could say to anybody is, once you've decided that you enjoy fishing for fishing's sake and you want to be sponsored, is to pick the people that you want to be sponsored by and show a little bit of loyalty. So you can't expect to jump in on one firm if you've not used their products. So decide on, there's generally, some firms do bait and tackle. Most firms do either bait or tackle. So you've got to decide really where your loyalties lie. So, decide what you're going to use and what you're comfortable with. And generally we all find what we use and what we're comfortable with. Once you've using that for any degree of time and you're catching on it, then make sure that people know about it. And the great thing about social media is it allows everybody to have a voice. In the magazine area, there were very few people who had a voice. And probably there's only going to be maybe 12 people a month in one magazine, then 12 people a month in 2 magazines or 4 magazines. It was very limited as to who could get their face in print. Nowadays, with social media, that's Facebook, Twitter and Instagram and whatever else there is, as an old school, there's probably other things, is you can have your voice, your face, your profile out there, which is a good thing and a bad thing. You've got to make sure it's positive. So the last thing that any business wants is somebody who's negative, who's moaning, who's swearing, who flits from company to company. They want somebody who shows a degree of loyalty, a degree of professionalism, and more importantly is out there catching carp. Not just catching carp on May and June, but catching carp in March, April, June, September, October, November, December, and putting it out there in a positive form. Yeah, we all have different things we want to have on our social media. I don't just cover fishing, I cover my other things, my music, my social life, my cycling. But the big positive thing is my fishing. So by all means cover other things in your social media, but make sure the positive things about your fishing. When you're fishing, make sure you take plenty of pictures of the fish you're catching from different angles. Make sure you take pictures of the products you're using, fish swim shots. Just use a bit of common sense. Build that profile. You can't take too many pictures. You can never go back and replicate it. So get as many pictures taken as possible. I take them, I sometimes think, I could do without doing this, but I know that it's necessary to take pictures on my phone and on my camera and my DSLR. So I make sure I've got plenty of pictures. It will take you some time to get assisted, but you will get assisted if you do it properly. You build up your profile on your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Make sure you get the pictures sent off to the weeklies, Angling Times, Anglers Mail, Carp Talk or whatever. Some magazines online will accept you if you're not a known angler. Write free articles. You need to go to conferences, go to slideshows. Get your face known. The more conferences, slideshows, tackle shop open days that you go to and get known, the more people will think, do you know, I know him, he seems a good lad or he seems a good girl, and that builds up your profile. You will start low, so you might get a bit of assistance with discount off bait or discount off tackle. The worst thing you can do is build up a bit of a name for yourself and then flick to another company and then flick to another company, because all you're doing is giving them a bit of promotion, but you are not in any way building up your own promotion. You're promoting somebody else and they're looking at you going, now that I know he promotes Fox, but who is he? So I would hope that people recognise me, not just because I promote Nash, but because they recognise me as Julian Cundiff or Jules. If you are recognised simply for catching carp, but nobody can put you with any particular firm, so when people see me in print, on social media, I would hope that they go Nash Bait Key, Nash Twisters, Pursuit Rods, etc, etc. That is important for the business if you're wanting to get involved in it. So you need to make sure there is a link between you, the fish you catch, and the firm, because if there isn't a link, you are no good to that firm. You're only as good as the business you're putting to that firm. So I could go on for hours and hours about sponsorship, but these are the important things. Do it because you love it. Start off low key, build up your profile on social media, ensure that you fish waters where you catch carp. They're not bothered about 30, 40, 50 pound carp. Those days are gone. What you need to do is catch plenty of fish. Fish any fish between 12 and 25 pound, as long as you're catching them regularly, explaining why you caught them, explaining what you've caught them on. Businesses will take notice and will support or assist you. And in time, you may well then become a consultant. It will take time, but you will get there. But you've got to start slowly, show loyalty, and don't be stupid on social media. Well, if the aspect of being sponsored was one of the main questions I get, the second probably biggest question, or third after please tell me multi-rig, is do you do tutorials? The answer is I have done tutorials, but only for charities. I've never earned a penny off any of the tutorials I've done. I probably have done maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen at the most, charity ones, purely and simply for good causes. You know, we all need to support good causes. I can support good causes by doing fishing tutorials or fishing guest sessions. I've recently stopped work, so that gives me more time. The reason I didn't do tutorials is purely and simply I didn't have the time. If I wasn't at work and I had time to go fishing, I'm selfish. I wanted to go fishing for me, to catch carp. And much as I love the company of other people, you can never fish as well as a duo as you can on your own. And I simply did not have the time to do tutorials unless they were for charity. However, April 2018, I've retired, which gives me time to do tutorials. It also doesn't give me that get out of jail excuse of sorry I don't have time, because that was a great one to trot out to people. I haven't got time, guys. I'd love to do. Nowadays I have more time. I ain't got loads of time, other things fill my time, but I suppose I've got time to do tutorials. Now there are some very good tutorials done by other people. People like Adam Penning, Tom Maker, Mark Pictures, Joe Turnbull. They all do great tutorials. They're one-on-one tutorials generally. They're anywhere a day, 24 hours, overnighters, maybe a bit longer. That's absolutely brilliant. Now the thing about tutorials is they are work. And I didn't work 38 years to work again. So initially looking at it, I didn't want to do tutorials because I don't want to work. I'm lucky that I've been careful enough that perhaps I don't need to work again. So I don't actually have to do tutorials to fund a lifestyle. However, I do like to give back to people. So I am sort of going to do tutorials, but not tutorials that will cut across those people that do them already and do them really well. I'm going to do what I would call the carp school tutorials starting at the end of this year. I'm going to get 6 to 8 people, whatever's a happy medium, and we're going to have like a carp school. So we'll take you to a lake and literally it will be, I don't know, maybe 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon of everything that I know are what I call good starting points. So about swim location. It won't be about taking you to water and catching fish. I can do that for you. I can take you to water. I could take you to a water tomorrow. I could catch you a 10 pound, a 15 pound or 20 pound to take you to the right water. That's great, but that's one person, and that's one person having to pay generally a substantial amount of money. What I'm going to do is maybe make 6, 8 at the most people have a day where they can all learn something for a nominal fee. A nominal fee that will cover my day. It's a bit of pocket money for me, but it means that anybody can afford it. 6 or 8 of you will go through all the things that make carp fishing in effect easy, not rocket science. So we'll look at location, we'll talk about how to look properly for fish, why you would look in certain areas. We'll then look at the setups that I use, the rod, the reel, the main line, the end tackles. And this will be a one-on, although I say one-on-one, it's 1-on-6, but when there's 6 of you there, we can really do it intensively. And you know, I'll have all the things there and you can actually spend time with me tying them up, looking at them, asking me questions, and it's far easier for me to do it with 6 of you. And we're not concentrating on having to catch a fish, because when you go on tutorials, I know you want to catch fish, and sometimes you miss out on all the good bits. So we'll spend time looking at the rigs, how to use foam properly, how to tie these rigs, steaming of rigs, how to use your indicators properly, floater setups, how to lead properly, how to use a marker float properly, how to bait accurately, how to set up properly, how to have multiple catches, you know, how to set up. It literally will be 6 to 8 hours of intensive education, sort of a carp school. We aren't going to be out there catching carp, because what I would rather do is have 6 or 8 of you learn as much as I can cram into you for those 6 or 8 hours and go away and use that on your water. Because ideally for me a tutorial is me going to your water and helping you catch carp from your water, rather than you coming to me, to my water, and me proving I can catch carp on my water and you can catch some as well. So hopefully, whether you fish a canal, whether you fish a big water, a little water, whether you're experienced or inexperienced, by spending a day with me, with a couple of other people, you will learn enough that your starting points, you'll have your starting points that you can use on your water. I'll be doing those at the end of the year. I don't know, it could be September, could be July, I don't know. When the mood takes me. I'm enjoying my fishing at the moment, having retired, but I will start to do the carp school tutorials later this year for a nominal fee. You'll be able to read about it on Facebook and Twitter, and hopefully it'll mean that I won't get so many people saying, can you take me on a tutorial? Wow, yeah, I've retired. It still amazes me after all these years of writing that people go, I didn't know you worked for the court. I thought you were a full-time angler. I think, well, yeah, really? I started work in 1980 at Selby Magistrates Court, a pure fluke. I had no aspirations as a kid. I went fishing, I was happy to go to fishing, go to rock concerts, but as I got a bit older, I thought, you need money to finance these things. And I think my mum and my dad also realised that, yeah, he needs his own money to finance these things rather than our money. So I realised that at some stage I was going to have to get a job. Now, I was never the brightest kid at school. I went to Selby Grammar School, Selby High School as it is now. And I was one of those who got through, to be quite honest, who got through. I never tried hard enough. I was too much interested in fishing and rock music. And horror of horrors, back in the olden days, O-levels and things like that, I got 2 O-levels passed and 6 Ds. Now 6 Ds were 6 failures, so 2 O-levels was a failure, a total failure. So luckily school let me stay on a year and have another year to do pass those O-levels. That was really, really good, because my dad gave me some advice. He said, there's going to be a recession soon coming along, and he says, with the greatest respect to you, Julian, doing A-levels, going to university, etc, etc, you're going to be the highest qualified shelf stacker in Selby if you're not careful. My advice to you, son, is to get these O-levels passed and get a job, and then learn on the job, because you get paid on the job and you can go fishing. You're not away at university. I thought, that's a good idea, Dad. So we looked at various careers. I looked at being a policeman, but unfortunately being a policeman, you don't start off in Miami Vice or the Sweeney with the speedboat, the cars. I thought of working for the bank, but it looked a bit boring, and a job came up at Selby Magistrates Court, which looked quite interesting. It was only an admin assistant, but it meant I worked in an office full of girls, which was a bonus. There was no stress, and I thought, this will do me, I'm getting paid. Eventually that turned out to me passing my law exams, so you couldn't just be an admin assistant for the rest of your life, Jules, you have to pass your law exams. And from 1986 onwards, I was a legal advisor in the Magistrates Court. That was great. It was great. When you're a single bloke, living at home with a banker mum and dad, it was great. So I caught lots of carp, went to lots of gigs, had girlfriends, etc, etc. Passed my driving test. But as time goes on, you end up with more responsibilities, the house and things like that. and all of a sudden I'm not working in Selby, I'm having to work out at Northallerton or Scarborough. I'm leaving home at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm getting home at 7 o'clock at night. And it got to the stage where it really was impacting on me and on my fishing, which is probably more importantly what you guys are watching it for. So at the age of 55 I decided, after 38 years of work, it was time to hang up my court boots, and in April this year I retired. Retired from court, not retired from fishing as some people thought. In fact, as soon as I put that I was retiring, I had 2 people who support me and product wise saying, why are you retiring from fishing? And I said, no guys, I'm retiring from court. Now when you retire from work, it is absolutely fantastic, but the great thing I was told, particularly by Mark Holmes, is don't throw yourself into anything too much. Just keep doing what you've done and you'll enjoy it. So all I've done is I don't go to work nowadays, and I love my job. Nobody loved their job as much as I love my job, but it was time to go. And all I'm doing now is I'm having more time to do the things I want to do, and I don't have to do really anything else that I don't want to do. So I've not gone mad at fishing. People say, oh, it must be great to be full-time and now you can do 2, 3, 4, 5 day sessions. That does not appeal to me. What it means now is I can pick and choose my sessions. Start of this year, it's been a hard year, hard winter, hard spring, and it was a struggle. But early April, conditions changed, and on one of the waters I noticed the fish were moving. Now normally I'd be doing overnighters, which would be a waste of time, but because I'm not working, I've been able to fish in the day. And I've been getting down there 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sessions have been incredible. One session had 20 carp in a day, another session 17, 9, 10, whatever. Purely and simply because I've been able to fish when the fish are feeding. Had I been at work and doing overnighters, getting there at 6 and winding in at 6 in the morning, I probably would have had a tenth, if that, of the fish I've caught. I ain't become a better angler overnight, I can assure you of that. Simply, I can fish when the fish are feeding. And more importantly, this year, I can pick and choose my times. I can pick and choose my waters. So I've retired, not to become a full-time angler, but just to do the things I want to do. I've always wanted to help other people in carp fishing. I don't want to do tutorials as such, but a couple of carp schools so I can help 6 or 8 people, maybe 4 or 5 times a year. I've always wanted to spend a bit more time going to a few big fish venues, fishing 48-hour sessions. I have got so many invites for so many waters, I want to take them up. I'm writing my next book, could well be my last book, sort of an autobiography based around carp fishing. If you imagine carp fishing meets Motley Crue's The Dirt, that's what it'll be. There'll be no holds barred, it will tell it as it is, and most of you will be shocked about the ups and downs of my life. It's not always been fun, sometimes it's been hard, but if you can see the problems I've had, that maybe you can find your way around and not make the same mistakes I've done, that'll be great. I want to spend more time with my family. I wanted to spend more time doing the things I like, the cycling, going to music gigs, not having to get home at 2 in the morning and leave before the last song because I know I've got to go to work tomorrow. But what it means is I can post more on social media, I can help more people out, and I can enjoy life. So retirement, I've never been as busy. It's funny because when I knew I was going to retire, about a year ago, I gave the work notice I was going to retire. And I thought, you know what, I'll make a list of all the things I want to do. And I wrote down about 70 things during the year. When they came to mind, I need to do this, need to do that, need to do this. Got about 70 on the list. And I thought to myself, just before I retired, it was a sad day, and I thought, you know what am I going to do when I've done all these things? I've looked at that list, I've done 5 of them, and I thought, where on earth am I going to find time to do those 65 other things on my list? I'm never going to get round to them. I've thrown that list away, well, I've put it into file 13. So yes, retirement's a great thing. Those of you who wished you could retire, you've got something I'll never have. If you're younger than me, you've got years. Don't wish your life away. You know, when you're 20, 30, it looks great to be a full-time fisher and be retired. You have got time that I've never got. So enjoy what you're doing. One day, you'll retire as well, and hopefully enjoy it just as much as me. Well, guys, and girls, sorry. That's it. I wanted to do, off the top of my head, as I am. I always thought that I always wanted you to be the person on the bank that I write about in the magazines. So what you've got there is literally what I do, who I am. If you meet me on the bank, and plenty of you will go, he's just exactly as we expect him to be, and that's great. And I always say this when I do my slideshows, if I've made carp fishing look easy to you, and if any of you go away thinking, I can do that, that's simple, I can do just what he does and catch just as many as him, or probably more, that's great. It ain't rocket science, guys. If you do the basics, the simple things right, and keep approaching things methodically and working hard, you will catch just as many carp as me, probably more from time to time, which is great. It ain't an ego thing to me. I'm quite happy to see you do that. It's been lovely to talk to you all. You can always see me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You read about me in Carp World, Carp Talk, Carpology. Anybody will have me, really. I'll write for anybody. As my mate Duff said, you'll see me at plenty of open days. I'd turn up for the opening of an envelope, as once said, so you'll see me there. So keep in touch, enjoy what I've done, and most importantly, enjoy your carp fishing, and I'll see you on the bank.